Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Gunfighters Women's Leadership Panel. Today, we have the opportunity to hear and learn from 5 exceptional women who are leading in our great Air Force. The importance of diversity and inclusion in any organization and culture give the people within it a sense of belonging and a place where everyone can flourish, no matter what their background is and what they look like. Including women in our military operations in more ways than exercising social equality is a vulnerable enhancement of military effectiveness and national security. Today, we are here to celebrate and hear the stories of just a few women who are doing their best to overcome the adversity and pave the way forward for an inclusive future. I would like to welcome Major Reed from the 366 Acquisition Squadron to provide opening remarks. As we continue to accelerate change, Major Reed is breaking barriers and leading the way forward for women in the Air Force. Major Reed.
Good afternoon, good afternoon. Forgive me for reading. I was trying to memorize all of this, but I would have made worse. So welcome and thank you so much for everyone that is tuning in and that's here today. And most importantly, for showing your appreciation and interest during Women's History Month. And being able to listen to some of these incredible women behind me who history in the making and will kind of tune into a little bit of their anecdotes. When Master Sergeant Williams called and asked if I was interested in doing the opening remarks, one of the words that she said, phrases just leapt out and stuck with me. And she's actually said it again earlier. Apparently you made an impression. In that moment I froze, because I'm trying to think, what did I say? What did I do? All these things came to mind at this meeting that would make an impression. I don't think I said anything. And in an instant, it brought back so many memories where simply being a woman in uniform that at one point I certainly was not allowed to wear and just made so much of a difference. That the fact that I've been in this uniform, the fact that I've worn it for nearly 10 years and that I do so proudly is a statement within itself. We're here today to talk about being a woman in the military and what those unique experiences are. You will hear many anecdotes today, some you expect and some you probably didn't. Being a woman in the military can one day be your biggest accolade and best motivator, and the next be the most frustrating and nerve-wracking thing you've had to face in years. The first woman to officially enlist in any service was Loretta Walsh. She enlisted in the Navy in 1917 as part of the Navy's attempt to prompt more men to follow suit and enlist. Despite not even being allowed to vote, her enlistment afforded her the opportunity to be the first woman to reach the rank of Chief Petty Officer, as well as the first woman to serve in a non-nursing capacity, you know, what most people seem to think that we do, of the armed forces. But there was someone else, Deborah Sampson. Controversial as maybe the first, but certainly one of the first recorded. In 1782, Deborah disguised herself as Robert Shurtleff and joined the 4th Massachusetts Regiment during the Revolutionary War. She was given the task of scouting neutral territories to assess British buildup of a stronghold. She led infantrymen on expeditions, commanded one-on-one confrontations with the Tories, led raids, captured enemies, dug trenches, stormed the British, endured cannon fire, took a sword to the forehead and a gunshot wound to the thigh, extracting the pistol ball herself. All of this under the guise of a man. Unfortunately, her gender was found out after falling ill and she was honorably discharged. In many ways, I feel that women sometimes still have to disguise themselves in order to secure their seat at the table. But not too much, as we can be criticized for being too much like a man, just as we can be criticized for being far too feminine. Many of us do this daily in an attempt to not come across as too different from our male counterparts and having to ignore and downplay the very facets of our beings that make us powerful. We calculate out every word, step, tone, face, smile, hair, walk, clothes, fitness, you name it. Calculate and habitually reinvent ourselves on the spot, only to be reminded by some of what is expected of you and what is not. I remember when I was a first lieutenant, I was in a meeting of maybe about 25 to 30 people. Very small thing happened, but it's one that just sticks out in my memory. This was, pre-COVID. There's a bunch of us sitting in there, and I was the only woman in the room. There was maybe 12 of us sitting at the table. And after about a half an hour or so during the conversation, and it went off track, the colonel looks at me and that was leading the meeting, and he goes, "Smile, LT. You don't smile enough." I looked around the table, and I looked around the room. No one else in that room had a smile on their face. I was approached another time and told, actually it was the same day, which is why it stuck out so much. And I was told that I should smile more because it made others in the room feel more comfortable. This is not the only time I've been approached about this task of bearing the emotional well-being of my coworkers when it was not expected of the men in the room. And as small as this might seem to many, that gesture, those words, that expectation that I was responsible for the comfort of those around me. A task that I was unknowingly assigned to because of the expectation of my gender. It was a realization in that moment that despite what I'd done, despite where I'd come through, despite that I was brought to this meeting as a SME, or the subject matter expert, I was still not looked at as equal. I could hardly pay attention the rest of the meeting as it made me so uncomfortable that the value that I brought in that moment was overshadowed because I was prettier smiling. We're used to hearing the overt actions, what we know is wrong, but gender roles are alive and well in our military. Being a woman in the military is choosing your next assignment based on where you feel you will receive the best options for your pregnancy, so that it won't hurt your career too much. Being a woman in the military is wearing a constant armor and sometimes allowing disrespectful and undermining comments to fall by the wayside about your gender because you don't want to come across as overbearing. It's having to prove your competence from the start rather than being given that luxury from the very beginning. You aren't considered as competent or depending on your career field. It's having to work 10 times harder because it's easier sometimes for men to relate to other men and to see their accomplishments more distinctly. It's eliminating and lessening the so-called feminine characteristics to fit in and be valued in emotional stoicism. It's sometimes having to take a back seat of your own program because the country you work in doesn't value your voice. It's having to unnecessarily fight and compete against other women, so you're not the one labeled as weak. Being a woman in the military is having to check your ego at the door because of all this and approach it with a sound mind. It's being knowledgeable and having to have more of those boxes checked. It's being prepared. It's being able to see a path and make sure that it fits all of us. It's being well communicated, emotionally adept. Being a woman is flexibility, multitasking, compassion, and strength. Being a woman is phenomenal. Thank you.
Awesome.
I would like to introduce and welcome our panel members. The Deputy Chief of Staff of Detachment 1, 366 Fighter Wing, Lieutenant Colonel Gretchen Yule. The Director of Staff for the 89th Fighter Squadron, Major Kelly Patterson. The A4 Superintendent, 366 Fighter Wing, Chief Nancy Borman. And Global Volunteer Mentor Life Coach, Nina Augustine. Finally, I am Master Sergeant Sophia Williams from the 389th Fighter Squadron, and I will be your facilitator for today's event. If there are any questions that the audience or Zoom members would like to ask, you can pose them on Zoom, and we will pose the questions as they come in. Lieutenant Colonel Yule, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. So
I thought 4 minutes was a really long time until I started walking through what I wanted to say, and then I realized that it's not. I started off in ROTC, and I met a boy, and then I joined the Air Force, and I married that guy, and he happens to be an F-15E pilot, so that kind of determined the locations of my career. While I was a young officer, my career field merged into 4 others. I started as a supply officer and then became a logistics readiness officer. And a lot of the competing and the competition for jobs I experienced. Then I had 4 back-to-back deployments over 5 years, and I really wanted to start a family, but we struggled with that. And so we sat down and I said, I'd like to focus on my career. I can't do both. I can't be a mom and an officer. And 1 month later, I found out I was pregnant. So that changed everything. I had a preemie. She was born 6 weeks early. And then at that time, we only had 6 weeks of maternity leave. So I struggled dropping her off every day at the CDC. And about 6 months after I had her, they gave me my 5th deployment. And I said, see you later. On the way out the door, I had seen in-service recruiter who signed me up in the reserves. And I did I did 9 years active duty, 6 years in the reserves. And after I got tired of traveling for my reserve job, I joined the Guard at Gowan. And then this job became available, and it's a 3-year active duty order. So I kind of got to start my job or my career active duty, and then try all the other options, and then probably ended on active duty. So that's a little bit about my story, but hopefully we'll go into the details a little bit more with the questions.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Yule. Major Patterson, can you tell us about yourself?
Of course. I am Gumby, that's my call sign. I grew up in Maryland. I actually went to an all-girls high school. It's a little known fact about me. And then I essentially went to an all-boys college when I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, which was a great time, but big, drastic environmental change for me. I studied meteorology there, did ROTC, got a pilot spot, went to Columbus Air Force Base for pilot training. And then I got MC-12s, which is a plane that probably most people have never heard of because it doesn't exist in the active duty Air Force anymore. So I did that for 3 years, deployed twice. We were doing 6 on, 6 off. And they shut it down and didn't know what to do with us. So they sent us pretty much all to remotely piloted aircraft. So I flew the MQ-1 Predator at Whiteman. Obviously the plane wasn't there. They were all overseas, so racked up even more combat hours from the comfort of good old Missouri. Met my husband on a LNO deployment to Ramstein. And then they didn't really know what to do with us at that point because we still didn't have an assigned aircraft. So there was a board, and I got one of the lucky few slots to go fly Strike Eagles, which was amazing. But going back to training for the 3rd time, took its toll on me for sure. So I did that at Seymour Johnson, then which is where I got married, and then came out here after that training was done, and I've been here for about a year. Had a stepdaughter who lives in Alabama, and that is pretty much it.
Thank you, Major Patterson. Chief Foreman, can you tell us about yourself?
Yes, ma'am. So I'm Karen Borman. Came in about 92, so I've probably been in a lot longer than probably most of the people in this room. First duty station for me was Misawa, Japan. So as a basic trainee, sitting there trying to fill out my dream sheet, I put everywhere where I wanted to be on the East Coast where I came from. Right? Air Force thought it was cute, gave me Far East. And there I am. And before leaving for basic, my dad, who is a retired Tech Sergeant Guard guy, he's finished life in the Air Guard in Virginia. One of the last things he told me before I left for basic was, Karen, whatever you do, don't be a crew chief. Okay, Daddy, got it. Okay, so here's me looking at these glorious, paragraphs describing these duties that I could do, and I wanted to work on airplanes. So I'm reading tactical aircraft maintenance. strategic aircraft maintenance, because that's what it was called in 92. Get that down. And then I don't even remember what I put after that, but the Air Force once again gave me the first choice and gave me, tactical aircraft maintenance, which is fighter crew chief. So I found home to my dad, Daddy, you have a tactical aircraft maintenance. He's like, Karen, that's a crew chief. I was not crying, so I'm crying to these TIs. And I'm telling him, my daddy said I can't be a crew. Well, who's your dad? Is he a colonel? No, he's a tech sergeant. Okay, keep moving. Right? So here I am, still a crew chief after 28 years, probably having worked on nearly every fighter in our inventory other than the F-35, and that would include some on a stick. We've got an F-117 on a stick at Nellis. So yeah, I'm probably a little old. Met my husband over in Japan. He was a crew chief as well, and then eventually later medically cross-trained into what he does now, which is civil engineering. So he is the guy to call when the air conditioning goes out this summer. And then we have one daughter she's adulting. She's 26 and she lives in Boise. So that's part of the reason we asked to come back to Mountain Home. And we're truly blessed to be here. But she's, like I think I just said, dental hygienist in Boise. We were in Japan for probably 13 years. We did 2 different tours. I don't have enough retainability to go back, but I go back in a heartbeat. I just love Japan. And this was Misawa. I only did Misawa, not anywhere else. But she loves to tell everybody she was born and that she grew up in Japan. It's just the greatest thing for her. Outside of that, I just graduated. I finished my graduate degree probably a week ago. Now I'm waiting for I doubled up through the winter, managed to finish it for the spring. Just waiting on the degree to confer in June. I'm a CrossFit enthusiast. I'm a coach, not actively, but that's kind of what I'm setting myself up for afterwards. That's kind of my graduate degree is not in CrossFit, but it was in sports and health sciences. But so I love fitness. That's just what it's about. I love exercise, nutrition, etc. As a chief, I probably, she and I would have worked together a lot as we work around airplanes and provide them because they're our customer as a maintenance person, safe, reliable aircraft. So I have been a chief in 3 different aircraft maintenance units. And then this is actually my first job as a chief that I am not an aircraft maintenance unit superintendent. So it's kind of a new thing for me. Again, very blessed to be here. I was at Nellis. You talked about this lady's silly story in Turkey. Well, in Nellis, I'm getting shot at in my backyard. So you can believe I was ready to leave Nellis Air Force Base. Wonderful base, crazy. It's a battlefield off outside of the gate. So again, very blessed when 2 positions opened up at a very small base for 2 chiefs in the Air Force. So very thankful to be here and appreciate you guys asking me to sit on this family.
Thank you. And Ms. Augustine, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my bio is really small. I think maybe more so than some people, I kind of struggle with who I am and my accomplishments, especially when you stack them up against some of the most accomplished women like you meet. But I started my journey off at 18, joined the Air Force, Security Forces Club, did 8 years, loved every minute of it, and I didn't get out because I hated it. I got out because they just kept deploying me, and I kept missing my son's birthday. So I did four assignments active duty, and then my husband, he was also a cop. He now is at it. Actually, he's jobless. So he has no job. He's deployed, and he'll come back with no job, but we'll go get one. And so we've been married for a little over 20 years. And this will be our 12th PCS. We move a lot. We've been to 5 different countries. And we tend to go to embassies as opposed to bases. And so I have had the opportunity to volunteer literally all over the world. After I got out of the Air Force, I immediately finished both of my degrees, my undergrad and my graduate degree, where I just had a passion for people. And so the lifestyle that we've gotten accustomed to going from embassy to embassy, I've been able to do some really incredible things with some really incredible people. And I don't know, I just feel like I don't know if anyone else ever feels this way, but when you start looking, when you start saying who you are, it kind of makes you self-conscious. And so, sorry if I'm stumbling, I normally don't. But yeah, so I have 2 boys. My oldest works at the gym. He'll be 20 next week. And then my baby's in the 10th grade and he's over at the high school. And so, yeah, that's.
Thank you, Ms. Augustine. All right, you guys ready to get the party started? Ready to go into these questions? The first question we have is, what has been the biggest struggle you overcame? Take it. Go for it.
I think for me, it was having, so by the time I got to, I've been in 9 years at that point, I've been around the block, a few times in the air crew world, just not in the fighter air crew world. And it was a struggle for me. I did not do very well, to be completely honest. And I think people expected that I would because I had a lot of prior flying experience, but it was just in completely different aircraft. So it didn't translate very well. Only one small part of it that you get through about 7 or 8 months into the program did not translate. So I did well during that 1 week. But anyways, it was hard and humbling to be, and I looked at as a leader and someone with more experience, but to not be performing as well as the second and first lieutenants that were in my class with me. So that was difficult. But I was still passing, the course. I was still there, and I just kind of had to push through. And my husband he probably has enough confidence for everyone in this room, so that helped a lot because I relied on him for support and enforcement and everything. And then reaching out for help from my classmates too, to make sure that I was going to be able to complete everything properly. So it was just humbling, and I guess the biggest thing I learned from it is asking for help, even from people that you wouldn't necessarily want to ask for help from. So I think that was my biggest lesson learned and struggle for myself.
Family and do the stuff, like I have a hard time with what is the most important to me, and I think any day of the week I'd say it's my kids. So but just to give that same level of effort to work and my home life is a challenge for me.
For me, my biggest obstacle was that transition from active duty to mom, to full-time mom. For 8 years, the Air Force, it was really my identity, right? Tech Sergeant Augustine, it's who you are, it's the name you carry, and then all of a sudden you're just a dependent or a spouse or all the other things that people say, they're just the mom. And that was probably the hardest, was having to relearn who I was, right? I came into the military a baby. I was 18. I didn't know who I was then. And then I grew up in this Air Force, and then all of a sudden that went topsy-turvy, and then having to find who I was going to be as a mother, as a woman, because I didn't want to lose myself in the next journey of life. And so for me, I would say the couple of years following my transition out of the Air Force was probably one of the most challenging ones, discovering who I was going to be outside of Tech Sergeant Augustine. And it's still an ongoing journey, believe it or not. It's been 12 years. And I'm still learning who I am as a woman. And so if that ever changes, I'll let y'all know.
I'm just flipping back through years and trying to figure out, what would I consider where I might have struggled. I don't know if struggle is the right word, but there were a few times that there were some situations that were just definitely utterly frustrating to me. And again, you know, most of you were not around circa 1992, right? What we're talking here too is a lot about culture change, and we've seen that change over many, many years, and it will continue to change as we go into the future. But definitely different Air Force of the time when I was a young airman. And it seemed that the only people available to deploy on the entire planet in Misawa seemed to be my husband and I. And not just, I have slapped hands with him didn't slap hands, I waved as he is in a quarantine area about to board the airplane, and I have landed in the AOR. So that's happened. Another time, commanders managed to get him out of there early. So he came back a week early before I departed. And then a third time, this was all out of Misawa Air Base. A third time, we actually were in Iraq at the same time. So at that point, you know, you're living in Japan, so we develop, we have our own family over there. You know, my mom is not coming over there. So amongst my husband and I, I'm like, okay, so do we send her back home, disrupt her from school and send her home to live with my parents? Or do we, I had some good friends there we had made, and they had offered to let her stay, and they had a daughter her age as well, same grade and stuff. They were friends. So ultimately we just balanced and we waited, and we're like, hey, I think we're gonna let her stay with friends. So she stayed with them. Thankfully, it was not deployed for 6 months at the same time, but we crossed paths, maybe 30, 45 days or so. So to me, that was a little bit frustrating, because today I feel like the leadership in the Air Force would take a harder look at that. It may not always work out, but we certainly, I think, pay more attention to those things, whereas that was cast aside. Where's your family care plan? You need to figure something out because you're the only Master Sergeant Crew Chief in Misawa, and I need you to go, which is utterly ridiculous. So that was what was frustrating, a little bit of a struggle for me, probably in the early 90s and into the 2000s.
Ms. Augustine, can I just piggyback real quick? Can I know how you started your transition? I mean, like Chief Borman is headed out, a lot of, because it affects not just females, it also affects the males. How did that transition start? I know some of us are a little bit scared, you know, little apprehensive of what that looks like on your way outside, because that's all we identify with.
The transition to deployment or
No,
transition to
civilian.
Oh, wow. It's abrupt, right? Because you literally are in uniform one day and then the next day you get a whole new ID card and a whole new identity. There's no like, oh, we'll let you keep that card for a little bit and you transition. It is abrupt. And that transition for me started mentally, right? I never wanted to give up my career. My father was Air Force. So I was born, I'm an Air Force brat. And so my dad always said I could be the first female Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. And that was my plan. I was gonna come in and I was gonna crush it, and that's what was gonna happen. But then I had my oldest son. And then when I had my second one is when the transition mentally happened. And it started to get hard doing the CDC thing. And once that mental transition started to happen, I started to feel ready. And so it was abrupt, as in the lifestyle was abrupt, and also we were both tech sergeants, so we went like 50% pay cut. That was also abrupt. It was also a transition. But I would say that transition, because it was that moment, I knew, I didn't get out on a whim. I didn't get out just because I knew that transition was happening inside of me. And so when I made that transition out of the Air Force, it was scary. And it took a lot of courage to do it, because I was giving up a whole bunch of dreams, a whole bunch of plans. And I don't know if that's answering your question at all, like the transition, but I would say that transition really starts on the inside. And I didn't make a move until I was ready. And then just luckily the way everything was happening after, at that time, that there was a rift going on, and so I was able to jump out because they were threatening me with which would have been a 24-month deployment with the Army in my primary AFSC, which I retrained, and I didn't know that they could deploy you in your primary AFSC. And so it wasn't a 2-year, it was a 15-month deployment with the Army, plus a 6-month training before deployment. So I'd already missed my oldest son's first 2 birthdays. So that transition happened real quick mentally when I realized it was time to get out. But it was hard. And when I think about it, whenever I see my husband put his uniform on and I see his Chief Stripes go on, even to this day, it still hurts a little bit. I'm proud of him, and I'm proud of him. But there's still a little bit of that was supposed to be me.
What year was that when they were giving that 15-month deployment? Was that like 2007, 8,
Yeah.
9?
7.
Yeah, because that's when I did Iraq several times. The poor Army souls were sitting over there because Balad was a joint base. And they were like, I could not say, I thank them for their service.
Yeah.
Because brother, you're suffering through a lot more than, my little 120-day or 180-day deal.
Cornelia, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I same feeling. So when I got up active duty, there's a gap between getting your reserve ID card, and I remember getting my little brown ID card, thinking like, oh, well, that's it. So I empathize a lot with that, that feeling of just one day you are, and then one day you're not, and it's very rough.
I'll say one more thing on that topic. My husband, he's gonna retire. He retires next April, so he'll be done like the end of this year, and then I'm 6 months behind him. And he has visions of working in CE as a civilian. I am really struggling to visualize myself. I can't. I'm like, I cannot visualize myself sitting in an interview and selling myself on some job, and it better be like at least 60K or more before I get out of bed. But I'm really struggling. I can visualize a new CrossFit movement or visualize just whatever, but I cannot see, what that future looks like. I mean, it's very, very difficult. So
Yeah, it's a scary one when you know that. So in the military, that they're going to send you to your next assignment. It's going to come inclusive with work buddies. It's going to come inclusive with job security and hopefully job satisfaction. When you're making that transition, you do think about that. Like, now I have to build that continuity in my own life for myself, while at the same time helping my children transition, while at the same time being there for my husband as he transitions into his new position. And so it's difficult. Yeah, that transition is not fun. At least for me, it wasn't.
No pun intended on this one, okay? I know we're shocking pride, okay?
Yeah.
How do you lead boldly? How do you lead boldly?
I guess I'll start again. Trying to minimize the awkward silences. So, I guess when I first started, I was more, kind of what Major Reed was talking about in her intro. I felt like I was trying to assimilate into the culture, and especially in the pilot world, it's its own culture, and I'm sure the maintenance has their own, and every little AFSC kind of has their own way of doing things, but it was very much like you have to be a bro and talk and walk like a man, so to speak, and I felt like I needed to act that way in order to fit in. And I think, and mentally, I felt like that was me, but that wasn't who I actually was. I just kind of conformed because I was around a bunch of men. And then slowly, as more and more women came into the units and stuff like that, then I started to realize, oh, I can do girly things. I can be a woman and be feminine, and I shouldn't have to hide that about me. And I'm still struggling a little bit with it and trying to learn how to do it. But I'm at least not as afraid to actually be myself.
Can you expand, so some of the words assimilate and conform.
Yes.
Can you, yeah, I understand, you're not a dictionary here, but can you, I guess expand on that, because the Air Force right now is in a culture of, taking us from not assimilating or conforming, but we're getting into this inclusivity. So can you expand on, especially for me, those two words?
On like examples of,
Mhm.
let's see. I don't know, just kind of like the locker room talk, I guess I would say, not like inappropriate or anything, just the way that conversations happen that, you know, maybe aren't, I don't know, it wouldn't necessarily happen amongst women, or if a woman was present, like, if you think about, if a bunch of guys are watching football or something, in that scenario, you know, they're gonna interact in a certain way, usually, and I don't wanna generalize. But if there's a woman there, you know, if it was someone's spouse, they might not say certain things, or the conversation might not be a certain way. And I think in the military, they'd almost, if you acted kind of like a bro, and I don't hate to use that term because I don't know, but if you acted that way, then they would treat you that way, which was good because then you were kind of in their little club. But then, I don't know, I felt like I had to act that way instead of just be myself. I don't know if that answers it or opens up a can of worms or something, but hopefully that was a good example.
Anybody else reading boldly?
No, when I hear the word bold, I think of Chief B, somebody who has a big personality and she's loud and a leader, and I'm like, wow, I wish I could be that. I am an extroverted introvert. I think a lot before I make decisions, but I don't think that that's any less bold. I just don't have the same personality. But when I saw it, I was like, that's Chief B. She's bold. It was funny. Like I put it with a person and not like the actions of leading. Sorry to cut you off.
Appreciate you.
Somewhere, I thought the same thing. Norman, I can't wait.
Meanwhile, I'm sitting over here feeling uncomfortable. But for me, boldly leading is being uncomfortable. I think I have been in situations where I've had to fire people and remove them from their positions, and I'm going to tell you that's the most uncomfortable thing in the world to do. But you can't let a problem walk by. I can't keep letting it go. You know, even if you look at our revised, you know, enlisted performance report system, you know, it was meant to kind of remove the standard marking everybody to the far right, and we are still marking everybody to the far right. No one wants to make the uncomfortable play. So I have been in too long and have seen too many things go by where I was rating on a person, a master sergeant, and it was right when the EPR system was changing in 2015, and my chief and I was a senior, we had several discussions. Well, I might hurt this guy's career, I might do this, I might do that, I might do this, I might do that. In the end, I wrote a bland narrative, in my opinion, and he got promoted. Go me, right? I should have made the bold play. I should have probably just made a marking. And so then I sat down with my chief and I'm like, we just let that happen. So I would encourage you to be bold. Make me in hindsight. And then here you've got a person that probably is not going to be the best, you know, their ability to perform that next target, they probably didn't have it yet. So it's uncomfortable.
So for me, leading boldly, kind of goes back to finding who you are as a leader. I think so often, You know, we meet great leaders along the way, great supervisors, great commanders, and we want to emulate that. Okay. Yeah. We want to recreate that in our own lives, their leadership styles. And I think sometimes we get lost in that sauce. It's being humble, knowing that you don't know everything and that there are things to learn from the great leaders, but also trusting in yourself and the leader that you naturally are. And I think for so many of us, especially me, I can sometimes fear the leader that I am. Am I going to be too this? How am I going to be perceived? How will they see me? Will they think that I'm prideful or boastful or whatever? And so I tend to kind of shy down and then take cues from other people's leadership styles. And, you know, so that way if it's a failed leadership style, it's not mine. Well, it's just really good, you know, so I think for me, leading boldly is learning the type of leader that you are going to be intuitively, right? And who you are and bringing that to the table because they promoted or you are the leader. And so they promoted you, the personality that you bring to the table. So for me, it was learning how to bring myself to the table in my leadership.
For those in the male-dominated career fields, majority of you guys, what hurdles should the Air Force look at working on to open these fields up to women, to make, like in maintenance or as a pilot, making them more appealing?
I saw that question.
Good choice.
I mean, that's
Like
what,
the recruiter. That's what I
Yeah,
was
that's
going
what-
back to, like, what's root cause? I got my 4th choice out of 6, and then I didn't know I could find a new one. I don't know if there is a way to draw or.
I know like when I was coming in, not that long ago, in 2006, when I was coming in, you know, you took your ass out, and that was, I was offered jobs, right? But for the most part, just like you two foremen, I wanted to do airplanes. I wanted to fly. That's too short for that crew. But I guess for me, it was appealing to be on the line. But for many women joining, they would gear more towards staying off that flight line and maybe more medical. So how can we work on making it more appealing so it doesn't deter great females or the potential that we have to put on that line? Or maybe you're right, maybe it is just a,
Or if their passion isn't being on the line, then let them navigate to the admin type office, yeah.
I think maybe some of the reasons why some women might cater towards the medical or some of the support functions is if you think about like shift work and quality of life. I mean, obviously medical, depending on where you're working, is going to have shift work in it as well. But if they have a family or want to start a family, then being an operator or like a maintainer on the line is not very conducive to having like work-life balance. And so, I mean, that might be one of the issues is just the scheduling of it. And then maybe some intimidation of, well, I've never worked on a car before. How could I work on a plane? Just because maybe there's some mental barriers or I couldn't fly that plane, which none of which are true. But if they haven't been exposed to any of those things before in their lives, then it would be scary, I'm sure.
So I like to pick up, I think a lot of times we're looking at recruitment and what can we do with recruitment? But I think it starts so much younger, so much before recruitment, right? We gotta give, you know, we need these kind of panels. So the young girls out there, you know, the ones in kindergarten can see the pilot and then they can say, I want to be that, I want to do that. They can see the maintainer, they can see, and they're like, oh, I can do that, I can do that. I just think, and then when they come to the recruiter station, it's not like, oh, what is this? It's, I've always wanted to be a pilot. This is what I'm gonna do. I've always, I wanna work on the engines of an aircraft. And so I think a lot of times for these inclusivity things, we are trying to start it in the middle, when I think we need to go back to the beginning and really start at the beginning. And we have to give a platform to our women pilots and our maintainers and our commanders and our women leadership. So when these young girls are seeing it, they're like, that's what I'm gonna do. And I think that's where it starts.
Also, I think if you look at, seeing, or if you pay attention to the recruitment commercials, right? Look at the diversity you see in there. So I think it's probably happening, but culture is not very fast. It's very, very slow. So even like the Air Force Thunderbirds, huge recruitment tool. They are, I know specifically they hire a diverse workforce, because that is the force that you are showing all over the world. So I think we are getting there, but it just may not be at the rate we want.
How do you think you can make the military more appealing to women? Because maybe it's not just within recruitment, and maybe that is along the same lines as what you guys been saying, as far as if they look like us, right? And we see it from a point of view, I guess, Ms. Augustine, is we see it from the middle, but maybe we need to dial it back. Would that be the same?
Well, you think about it, right? All your military movies, right? Every time you see a movie and there's like all this action, the Saving Private Ryan or the Transformers, it's not a bunch of women out there, doing their thing. It's the men, and which is great because men have value also, right? But so when a young girl, she's watching TV, she's not drawn to the military because she's not reflected in that. Or, especially I've noticed young ladies have become way more sophisticated in their makeup and the way they dress. When I was in 8th grade, I was like in sweats, my hair was a mess. I look at pictures. It was a whole, and I see 10th graders now, and I'm just like, you could be on the cover of like a Cosmo magazine. And so when they do see a woman in the military on a movie, a lot of times she's drab, right? She's not very feminine, and that doesn't appeal to them because that's not who they are. And so I think we have to start, and I think the new movement with the hair, I think that's a great movement in the right direction. And it might seem little, but I think allowing women to maintain their femininity while also being fierce is I think it's gonna be a great movement. Get women into the military.
So you mentioned the hair movement. Hashtag free the bun.
I haven't heard that one.
What is the most significant change that you've seen in the military, just in general, or maybe that appeals to women? I know we just had the hashtag free the bun, but anything else? I know we had the instead of the 6 week. You mentioned we've gone further. So that's a great one, because I know much like you, the 6 week drop off tore my heart.
I don't know why paternity leave is only 10 days, but that's another whole can of worms, I'm sure.
Well, so like,
Or 15 or whatever. it
well,
is.
yeah, but you mentioned the maternity leave, and I feel like that's a great step. Like when I was thinking, that was, the paternity leave was the policy that I feel was just the most impactful, because I remember, being so military. My husband's a great father, and we both struggled with keeping the house clean, but he never once, because things weren't done. I felt like a failure as an airman with a capital A. Then I would go home and my house would be a mess, and I felt like a failure as a mom. And my husband, although he struggled and he wanted the same things, he would strive. And I think that this paternity leave is, I think it's just a switch in mentality. Hopefully that will start making, especially for dual military, making it a more equitable, an equitable event or endeavor to be you know, a team parenting where both, and so that the woman doesn't have to necessarily get out because it's a team effort. And I think, for me, that one was the most impactful.
Which isn't it, now I'm thinking about it, isn't it the primary caregiver is, you can decide who is, so even if it's a man that's married to a civilian, they could still take primary caregiver leave? I'm pretty sure that's a thing, but that's a culture thing, no one ever wants to push that button and say, oh yeah, I'm a primary caregiver when their wife, you know, is a stay-at-home mom. It doesn't really sound good, but technically it's a thing, it's just a culture shift, I guess. It's a whole other topic. What was the question?
What is the most significant change you've seen in the military in general, or based off of women? And I know the other one we had was, this was not a couple years ago, but opening up special forces for women. and
Oh, yeah,
kind of
combat positions.
Giving us,
Yeah, that's probably the broadest one I've seen besides the hair. The other one that's specific to my career field is that pregnant flyers don't need a waiver to fly. They don't have to, they're not forced to fly when they're pregnant, but they at least don't have to go through the whole waiver process and only are allowed to fly in like the first trimester or whatever it was. Like now they're allowed to fly during the whole time. Obviously that's for non-ejection seat aircraft, so it wouldn't apply to Strike Eagles. Yeah. No, you're totally out from day one, but for non-ejection seats. But I think that's cool. At least it gives them the option and is less of a barrier to be able to do your primary duty and not feel like a drain on your squadron.
what are some battles you faced, whether it's been in the military, off the military, whether in uniform, not in uniform?
People don't believe that I'm a fighter pilot if I'm not wearing this. That's probably the biggest one out of my uniform, but I don't know.
Or you go to pick up something at like clothing and sales and they're like, what's your husband's name?
Yeah.
All right, I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fine, thank you.
So I think for me, being a civilian and I do crisis management or crisis and disaster relief. So, you know, there's a disaster in the world, I can be called out and to go do that. And the disaster portion, it tends to be really male dominated. There are a lot of women, but it's a male dominated world. And I remember my last relief, I went out and I rolled my ankle, and I was one of the few women that have been out for that organization. And I just remember my ankle, my entire foot was black and blue. And I had a boot, and I just zipped up my boot as tight as it could go. And I worked 3 days on which I found that was a level. They're not gonna not take any women out again because of me. I'm out there in the middle of a hurricane going through all the debris, and so I feel like the obstacles for women are not just in the military. You know, breaking down those. It was mentioned after I hurt my ankle, like you could hear the whisper, like, oh, what's she gonna do? Like, is she gonna like pop out, or you know, like you could hear it, and so for me that's.
Yeah, I know what you mean about like feeling that you're representing all women and your performance is being judged on that scale. So I definitely relate to that.
Is that Team Rubicon? What's your
So,
organization?
not Team Rubicon, but I did deploy alongside them, but taking clean water out to people after disasters, making sure they have access to fresh water. Nothing, no, my last movement was before COVID, so I don't know how they're doing it now, but.
What is the best advice you've received?
I got you. So I have two like defining moments of advice and the first one was the chief. I was a second lieutenant. I'd come in the building and I'd unzip my Gore-Tex, but there was a DB in the building, so I was stopped. And he said, "LT, zip it up or take it off." And like that attitude, like that was it for me. I can't remember his name. I just remember he was a jerk. And
Don't want my problem, y'all.
that was 20 years ago, but it was not a problem. But I just, that right there was like, that is not how I want to lead. You know, it was like the opposite of what I thought leadership was. But then I deployed in my first deployment. I had a donut of misery, like the countdown Excel. You're probably all too young to know what that is. But a chief walked by and he's like, he's like, "Don't count the days, make the days count." And I guess from that moment on, I kind of took like a piece of each day and reflected on not getting through it, but what I did that mattered, I guess. So good and bad experiences, but yeah, those are my best advices.
So did you zip it up or did you take it off?
I took it off. I think I shame. Now looking back, I had a different reaction 20 years later, but yeah.
Jeez. So here's what it looks like in nowadays, present day lieutenant's world is a lieutenant that looks, I don't know, 22, sitting there at the desk with no shirt on.
Oh.
Can you imagine what this chief said? Ma'am, I'm going to need you to put that shirt back on. If these airmen did not know who you were, they would absolutely think you're an airman. So I never take my blouse off. Think what you want, but definitely for a young officer. And that was just recently. Back at Nellis, I was like, I'm gonna need you to put that on. But I mean, we had a relationship. I'm like probably the one with the other guy that walked out. I had something now. I forgot. Oh, I know what it was. I had called the chief and asked for advice. And it was something simple, y'all. It was like, should I write this guy a deck or not? Going back always to these things that we have to make these decisions on. And we talked through it in the end. He said, Karen, you already know the answer to the question, right? So if you're sitting there with whatever the decision is, and it's really like the devil and an angel on one side of you or the other, and you're really struggling with, oh, there's something just eating at me. I can't make this decision. You already really know the answer. You should make the uncomfortable decision is probably the direction. So that was probably something for me, and I've used that a lot throughout, and then have used it on myself, and then I've told people that, and they still want to make the other decision, and then I'm just, okay, all right, I'm just here to advise.
What is one thing you wish you knew before you joined the military? I don't know about you. As much as I credit the Air Force being, so to speak, there was just so much I didn't know. And I think I would have had a completely career path had I known myself just a little bit better. From my career choice to family planning, all those things, different experience. I don't regret the experience I had, but that's the one thing when my son turned 18 and he wanted to join the Air Force, I did not want to go straight out of high school. I was like, you need to take a gap year, you need to find yourself, know yourself a little better, work a 40-hour job as a civilian for a year or so, and then make a decision. I wish I would have done that. What is one
Change
thing?
up the military. What would what wanted to know? Yeah.
No, I don't. I honestly don't. Just do it. Do it live. Figure it out. And you learn along the way and become, I don't know, who you end up being.
I like what she said though, because what's funny is I had no idea what I was doing at 18. I was 17, I graduated, my birthday's in November, the way they do the school years back then, but had no idea what I wanted to do. I tried to go to community college, just was partying, and then I'm like, all right, I'm gonna join the Air Force, because my dad kind of prompted me. But one thing I was interested in, and I just didn't pursue it, and I should have been a better student, and I wasn't as a younger person, but now I strive for perfection, and I'm like, why did that lady give me a 99.8 on that? Who does that? But so I have learned over the years, to be a better student. But as a young person, I epitomize, I guess idolized my basketball coach, and she was a gym teacher as well. And I was like, oh, I want to do that, right? But nobody really took me by the hand. Here's how you're gonna get there. So anyway, that was my interest, and then I ended up joining the military, and then ended up Air Force rolling the dice, sending me to Japan. My mom says I couldn't have picked a more perfect husband like this. She loves this guy, and she had never met him, and we got married, had a baby, and she'd never met him still. And so, but then full circle, it's the same thing. I still, sports and health sciences, okay, I'm just full circle, 30 years later, finally doing what I probably was, where I was at when I was 18. I don't know if that answers the question, but what would I change about the military? Are they really gonna send me to Japan on my first duty station? I just wasn't expecting that at all. I guess I should have known.
Next question I have is on mentorship. Unless you guys have another.
What you got something coming in live?
I have a question. Do you think the mentorship opportunities for women are as available as those for men? Are there any barriers to mentorship for women?
I think you have to. So hard, and I think that was probably the answer to my last question, is you a long way. I don't think though that assigning a mentor, I think you actively have to seek out someone that you respect, that you see similar qualities in, to be your mentor. That's my advice on finding that. I don't think there's any barrier or limit or anything. You have to reach out. And that's what I think.
So when you say that, I feel like what you're saying is 100% right, but I feel like that's the barrier, because I feel as if for a lot of our male counterparts, mentorship will naturally flow for them, right? They hit that leader who just takes them under their wing. And I think for me, I know I had to, being in a male dominated career field, there wasn't, like, I can count on my hands how many women, and then women who look like me, and then women who had similar, the list kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And where my male counterparts, they all kind of clicked with the chief or the lieutenant, and they kind of took them under their wings, where I had to go search. And I think for me, that's kind of a barrier, that I don't think women mentorship doesn't naturally just happen for many women, but for a lot of men, it's easy to find someone who you relate to. And so as much as I agree with you,
My mentor is a man.
Yeah,
So,
my two mentors are men as
so I
well.
do seek out this.
But I'm sure for some people it would be more important for their mentor to be a woman, but for me, I don't know, it doesn't matter. And at least the way they mentored me. But
well, it also depends on what you're looking for in a mentor, right? Because I wanted to be, when I was in the military, wanted to be a mom, right? And so who am I going to look for to show me how to find that balance, help me to do those things, but someone who's, been there kind of and done that. And so not to say men can't be mentors to women, but I would say that women often have a unique struggle in the military that often I feel like can't be answered in a way I should say that a woman mentor, I feel, would answer a lot of the things that a woman experiences, just by being in the military. So I do agree
Yeah.
that mentors, I was speaking more along the mentorship of how does a strong woman make it? How do you make it being authentically you? How do you do it with your cute hair and your nails and being feminine, not being over masculine? How do you, like those, especially when I was in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was very important to have someone to show me that fine line.
So then the question is, how do you have that strong woman? How do you identify very much so as a female? Up here, we had like Chief Foreman, Lieutenant Colonel, Major Patterson as well, but you guys have a lot of years and successful in your career. So how do you do it? How can I come and say, hey, Chief Foreman, I look up to you, like bleed on to me, you know? How do you, 'cause the perception, my perception of you, Chief Foreman, is you're a strong woman in maintenance. Really little shoes, big shoes to fill. So how do you gain that respect? How do you get seen? That's one of the biggest obstacles I have in maintenance. Is I said it the other day in the office, I don't think they hear my decibels. I don't think you can hear me. And I'm 5'2" in stature, so maybe I need to stand on the table so you can see that in my heart, I'm 7 feet tall. So how do you feel that? It's between maintenance or just in general? How can we be seen and heard while still reserving the right to be a female? How do we do it?
$1 million question.
Even you, Major Reed. Because your opening remarks touched on it. You guys want an open table, right?
One thing I was told when I was looking into just what to do, whether what job to apply for, what command to look at, there's a path that's set. There's a path that said there's what they expect you to do in order to get to a certain position, a certain level, what have you. And one thing that Lieutenant Colonel Trevor, Colonel Trevor Williams told me was to, whatever decision you make it your own. Make sure that decision that you made is what you want to do. So regardless of how it plays out, like that's what you want. And I constantly seen people take that path that was expected of them and it not play out the way they want. And now they're looking back on all these things that they gave up, all these times they defied themselves and all these things, and it just did not turn out the way they wanted to. And I was like, I would hate to get into this position and look back that I got here or didn't even get here by rejecting myself. So you can say, be bold. You have to be, I'm not gonna say be unafraid, because Lord knows there's been so many times I've been like, well, this is gonna get me in trouble. But just own it and be you. Like you have to know where you're coming from. Know the regulations, know what is before you, what you're supposed to do, but know those consequences if you step outside that boundary. But be willing to step outside that boundary. That way, when you get there, you know you did it for yourself. And you did it being authentically you.
I think people recognize authenticity. I know I certainly can. I can tell whether or not you're having a good time over there doing this, or whether you're checking the box, right? But it's just like she said, it doesn't matter the position you're in. I think it's what are you going to make of that position? And then, she talked about if you make the decision, you make it, you stick with it. But I would say make sure it's fair, right? So if you're going to make this decision on one airman, try to make a similar decision if the circumstance is similar, right? Every circumstance is different, but maintain balance. It probably doesn't answer your question. But just to caveat on what she said, I like the authenticity thing, because people know when your heart is in it and when your heart is not. You can't really glaze over.
Here's a question, I guess. We're Oscar.
Oh,
You guys are right. How oftentimes, if a woman is overly passionate about something, right, we come off as either emotional or DJ extra, whatever you want to call it. If a woman is too stern, we're filling shoes. So how do we balance that? How do we, how do you not fix it? Because there's nothing that needs to be fixed. I leave with my heart and that it is what it is. But how do how do we counteract that? Or is it worth counteracting?
Respect to the authenticity, you be you. I mean, I don't care if somebody cries in front of me or passionately tells me I'm wrong, or, the emotional level. I've been told I'm too much of a mom and not enough of a leader, and that kind of a thing, where I just legitimately care about you and your success, and I will take you under my wing because that's my mothering nature. But I think it's just authenticity, and if that's you, you don't change to fit into what you think you should be as a woman in the military.
I think the raw answer is there's always going to be a bias. I have stood beside a buddy of similar rank and watched him because people respond to him. This is older Karen, years ago Karen, but I watched him communicate with this chief, calmest manner. Chief is screaming in this guy's face, but I'm just watching my buddy. And I know for a fact that I could not have said the same thing. I want there not to be bias, but I just think that it does exist, and goes back to culture, which I keep dropping these culture hints in because that's kind of what I wanted to talk about as I did some closing remarks. But we can affect that ourselves, at least in the worlds that we have in front of us and our airmen that we work with people.
So then, how do we make that change? Because oftentimes, there's master sergeants out there, right? You have your NCOs and all of our peers. Sometimes maybe it's not blood. You guys are leaning on to me, but I'm present. So how do we get that to the people on Zoom or down to the lowest airmen? How do we get that to them, that we are a culture, we're a vessel of change? Like, we're here to it starts with us. That's how I feel. I feel like it starts with us. But how?
Absolutely. So let's say I want to make something change. I'm going to go to you. You need to make something change. Where's my staff sergeants in the room? You're going to go to the staff sergeant in the room. You're the influencer. I need you to make that change. And then you're going to go to your senior airmen and you're going to say, these guys are the influencers. They're going to get with the younger airmen. So that's how it starts, right? So, but you can't just, drop a match and walk away and hope that it burns, right? You have to keep at it. So
and it needs to be everybody. It's not just, oh, well, I have your back because we're women and I'm gonna tell someone, oh, she wasn't being too emotional. Everybody has to be on that and have to break that mindset, not just, oh, the women have to band together. No, it's a whole team and it involves everyone.
And it starts with having conversations like this, where you can be open and explain, stuff that might not come out any other place. But start having the tough conversations in your shop and express your concerns, and so other people relate to you having those experiences.
I really like what the chief is talking about with the culture. Culture happens step by step, person by person. And I think a lot of times what happens is we're that passionate person. And then we let the world, we let the words of people dim us. And so it kind of validates, right, them. Like, if I can throw a little water and dim that light. And I think that women, if we just keep on, because you can see the change, because in the culture it changes slowly, and you'll start to see the change. We have conversations like this, you see more strong women, in the workplace, and then eventually, and it sounds so hard, right? Because the word eventually, denotes that, like, fairness shouldn't take time. Like, if you stab somebody and you pull the knife out an inch, it's not you know, you want us to be happy with that, but because culture changes so slowly, you just have to continue to be the fire and not let the culture dim you, because that's what they're gonna do, because they want you to conform. And so we constantly have to just keep being ourselves, in a way that is true to us, right? Because oftentimes what happens is we're fiery and they try to dim us. And so we go over the deep end with our fire or we dim, right? And we just have to keep the path, like stay true to yourself. You don't have to go to one area or the other, because eventually your leadership style and who you are will absolutely garner and gain the respect that it deserves, because there is nothing wrong with being a mom and a leader. Because I tell you what, I would not want to send my son into a military where everybody was like, get this done. There was no one there to nurture him when he was having a hard day. There was no one there to be there. I expect men to do it too, right? I expect there to be some dads in there to comfort him too, but we absolutely bring a value added, and we should never let that be dimmed.
Or, for instance, in an aircraft maintenance unit, I might have, 20 senior NCOs that, number one, need to be buying what I'm selling. And so how long is that going to take? And I'm telling you, them guys will wear me out. I'm thinking back to Nellis and I'm like, and every group is different. I'm like, these guys, they're awesome. They just need to be empowered, blessed, walk away, right? But the other group, they were just like, this chief is out of her mind. And I mean, this one guy I could not get him on my side. By my side, I mean the Air Force side, like just how we do business. Anyway, finally toward the end, I'm like, I think I got this, you know? And then, and it was simple stuff, y'all. I'm talking about like uniform wear and how we forget, where we are sometimes. Like, hey, remember what's over your heart, which is our U.S. Air Force. Anyway, I had one of my senior NCOs, and just before I was leaving, and it was probably, I was in that unit probably 11 months. And he goes, Chief, you're not gonna believe what I just heard. I was like, what? He's like, I was in the men's room. And he's like, I heard one of our airmen correcting another airman and saying, we don't do that in striking. And it was about how he was about to enter or exit the building, because they would come in with half uniform and half civilian clothes and then put on a coverall. And I'm like, no, we don't do that. We wear uniform in or we wear civilian clothes, and it's no mixed thing. And they thought I was the worst person. But it took 11 months. But finally, the very end, right, the caboose, the airman says, hey, we don't do that here to the new airman. It just takes time.
Because change is hard. No one wants to change.
No. That's why my hair's so big ponytail above my collar. It's fine. 28 years of institutionalism will do that.
She got hashtag free the buck.
I know, we're on there. I can't do that. Very sophisticated.
I want to open it up, and I'm asking all the questions. If you guys have questions out in the room, you guys are free to ask.
I do have one thing I want to say, and you were asking what was the best advice.
Yes.
So my husband says this one thing: ask good questions. Asking good questions is the hallmark of a good leader. And so I encourage the asking of good questions, because that says that you're digesting the material, you're really hearing it, and you want to get something else from it. And so if this is just the practice of you learning how to ask good questions, take it, because we don't want to just sit up here all the time.
All right, I'll go. Chief, so you mentioned bias a little bit and I feel like you were kind of looking at that as a barrier to cultural change. And I would actually argue inclusivity as well. Do you or any of the panel members have any advice on recognizing and working through those biases related to either women, gender, race, anything?
Somebody take it. So, okay, go ahead. No,
Oh, I just read 2 really great books, and unconscious bias is something, obviously it's unconscious, you don't know you have it, but reading, I read White Fragility, which was racial bias, and I read Missoula by John Krakauer, which was about a series of rapes in a football town in Missoula and about how they prosecuted them. And I would tell you that in both of those, I realized I had biases that I was not openly aware of. So I think just like educating yourself about like, well, if she wasn't wearing that, it probably wouldn't have happened, you know, just that the internal dialogue you have that you think is culturally acceptable, but until you see it or hear it or experience it, you don't even realize you have it. So I think like some of it is just I think that's the challenge, is identifying you have the bias and how do you do that. But those were two that just recently opened my eyes to.
Go ahead.
So,
Struggling.
for me, I think we gotta stop saying, this is one thing I hate when I hear people say, you can't say that. All we're doing is shutting people up, and hopefully that they'll start saying the right things. We gotta start asking people, why do you say that? Like, if that's not okay to say, then we need to ask ourselves, well, why do we say them? Like, what is in us? And I think Sergeant Parker. No, Sergeant Parker, but I didn't know if I should call him Senior Master Sergeant Select Parker. And so he was talking yesterday, he was saying that an emotionally intelligent person will always recognize that they have an unconscious bias because we all have them, right? It's evolution. We all have them. And so educating ourselves, but asking ourselves the uncomfortable question, right? Like a lot of times we know the answer, why we said it. We know, we have that, we know why we said what we said, but we need to admit it to ourselves. And I think as long as we just keep shutting people up, you can't say that, as opposed to rooting out why we're saying it. What is it? Why would we say she was wearing that? She wouldn't, like what? How did that get there? And so I think we need to start asking ourselves that hard question. When we're saying something and we're like in the car, we're like, oh, I should have said that. Ask ourselves what is in there and then educating ourselves about that.
Yeah, I like the emotional intelligence thing, because I know I have biases, right? But there's the cheap Borman answer, and then there's the Karen Borman answer, right? And then so many times I have to, the internal monologue, and I have to, okay, this is your job. This is the way, you have to select this way. This is your chosen profession. And I also think, I'm not saying biases are okay. I know we all have them, but I would just be wary. You're gonna have maybe your mentor, whoever your confidant is, right? You can share these weaknesses, share these biases, but obviously it's not something you'd want known as your character. Oh, well, she's biased about everything. That'd go great. I'm sure I'd be asked that for the next time. But I like the emotional intelligence, which means recognizing, we've got some flaws, and like you said, you've got some blind spots and didn't recognize it. So I know she's making lists over there and probably will just go to that. So now that I'm done class, I can do Audible. That's the new jam. Audible. I don't have to read it.
I wouldn't really read it. I was
Doing stuff. Difficult question.
I have something for the whole panel, anybody wants to answer, but along with blind spots, as a male supervisor, can anybody identify from your past, maybe well-meaning male supervisors that have some of those blind spots or biases that they just don't even recognize? They're not necessarily meaning to do harm or bad people, but they just have those cultural blind spots.
Right off the bat, some of the things that I can think of is usually at least as a young officer, I was kind of always the go-to person to be tasked for like the holiday party or stuff like that. And I was good at it, but not because I was a woman. Like, I'm not really a party planner and really into that sort of thing, but I'm at least organized, so it went well. But then like you get tagged for all of those things. So trying to break through like, oh, a man would be better at this or a woman would be better at that, which is hard. You might not even realize you do it. And I feel like I've for sure done it myself. So things like that is like a not easy way, but like a tangible thing that stuck out. Or when you said earlier that people say that you're more like a mom than a leader, like I hate when I hear that too, because I got called mom like in my most recent training unit, because I had 24 lieutenants basically and one other captain, and they called me mom, and I basically was, but I kept thinking to myself after a while, I'm your leader. I'm the one that's like making sure everybody's, doing what they're supposed to be doing, and, telling them when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And like, if it was a man in that position, they would say mom, they would just say leader. So I don't know, that's just like another word, I guess, not like a trigger word, but kind of, after a while, it got kind of annoying. So I don't know if that really answers your question, or maybe someone else could chime in, but those are just things that like I thought about.
I think Major Reed told a great story this morning in regards to that. I don't know if I would have picked up on that, the young lieutenant, the only female in the conference room, and then asked to smile. Maybe you've done that, right? I might not have picked up on that, but you did, right? So it could be something as simple as that. And you're like, well, why did I ask for that, right? And peel that back, but I just thought I'd bring that up.
Can I give you just a vulnerable story from when I was active duty? I was a brand new airman at my first duty station, and my flight chief, so I was a cop, and we get posted in good post, bad post. And I had a flight chief tell me bluntly that if I wanted the good post, that there were some things that I needed to do for him. I was like, well, I guess I'll be on the bad post. And I had the other shift's flight chief was also a male. And I go to him and I tell him what was said. And he said all the right things, but he never encouraged me to report him. He said, you're powerful, you're good, like you don't have to listen to that, blah, blah, blah. He said all the right things, but he never pushed me and encouraged me to report him. And what I got from that, what Airman me got from that, was that I can say something, but the men, they were always going to have each other's back at that. There's this line, like they'll call you wrong, but there's the line that they're not going to get each other in trouble. And maybe that was maybe I took that in the wrong way. But encouraging when you do have someone who comes to you, maybe not as traumatic or drama filled as what I said, but not stopping short, being willing to make an enemy of a fellow male coworker because they've done or said something inappropriate has to be your stance. You have to cross that line. You have to say, you know what, I'm not going to let, I don't want to ruin someone's career, or I don't want to, he's a good guy. And that's, I hear that a lot, like, oh, they're a good guy, or they're a good person. And we have to, well, are they? Like, if you have to caveat, they're a good guy, but, or they said this, but they're a good guy. I mean, when are we going to stop caveating? So I think making sure that as a male supervisor, that you are ultra sensitive, because women, especially the male dominated career fields, don't want to be that one girl who goes out and says something. Because I guarantee you, if you get to me, he's doing it to other women. Right? There's nothing special about me. So just keeping your eyes open and aware that you might think the guy is really great because he's not going to proposition you for the most part. So just being observant and willing to break that fraternity, that bond that you have with your fellow brothers and moms.
Can I caveat what you said on that? So
Don't caveat.
Oh, so that's a bad word, right?
Caveat.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we speak on like the supervisor, right? Which I definitely love that you asked that because I was hoping that that's what this panel or this symposium, whatever you want to call it, that's what I was hoping this forum was to educate the male eventually supervisor or supervisor now. But then sometimes we have, and I want to speak to that, the airman, capital A airman, who is, abuses that, right? So oftentimes, as we should all know male regulations and the male should know the female regulations. But it's our day to day, right? So it's what happens if we can talk to that airman like who just had a baby or that airman who is pregnant, who can just sometimes pull the wool over a male supervisor's eyes. When we talk to that airman, how can we bleed to that person, who I hope eventually sees the recording, not saying they're mine. But can we reach that person where it's like, oh, well, I just had a baby, I have to go pick up my child from the CDC, it's 4 o'clock, gotta go. And it's like, I'm a single mom too, you don't have to go. CDC doesn't close at 4, I'm not understanding. But for a guy, they're like, I guess I don't wanna deal with the headache, let it go, you know? So how can we speak to that airman? Can we give that airman advice?
I guess the question would be, because people, both genders try to get over on their supervision. So then why point out, just be, you know, if a person is gonna try to get over on the regulation, that speaks more to their character than to their gender. So I think you have a character issue you need to deal with as more so than a gender issue, if that makes sense. So the question itself I find troubling because that's often how the stereotypes and the biases happen. We think that somehow women are unique in trying to get over. I've seen men, and I'm not active duty, so I won't call y'all out when I see you, but I see y'all under y'all mask with your lines. I see it. I'm not gonna say nothing, no. I see you. And so, and, you know, they use the mask as a way to kind of hide. I mean, it's a character. That's a character issue, not a gender issue. And so I oppose the question on that ground that you should not confuse character with gender.
I concur, I'll accept it.
I'm not trying to be combative. I'm not trying to be combative, but you see how the question itself
Yes, it does.
leads to bias.
And that's how do we remove that bias? How do we, and I know, so I know it's a gradual, one thing I learned today, it's culture change, and it's slow, and slow and steady is what's gonna win this race. But how do we kind of start chipping at it, you know? Some of us are just accepted.
Think about it if someone came to you and they were a woman saying that versus, and then in your mind replace that with a man coming to me with the same complaint or trying to get out of work or whatever, would you change how you handled it? And if the answer is yes, then that's wrong. It should just be like a baseline. I know it's hard to do genderless or whatever, but
I think the different genders, I would posit that the different genders maybe do struggle when it comes to certain, like, I had some a male tech sergeant, and he was really struggling to understand a gal who had just had a baby and some things, and he came to me for advice, and so we talked to her first sergeant. So I know that my husband, even at different times, we have talked, and sometimes he's uncomfortable digging into women's issues and am I going in the right direction? So I think that exists as well. So I would just obviously offer to try to get another perspective from somebody, maybe fix that. But again, it doesn't make you any more comfortable in dealing with the issue. So it goes for both, whatever the other issue on the other side can be, whether it's male or female.
But that's the question is, you know, is it also a form of bias if a male supervisor is reluctant to correct and hold to standard someone just because of their gender? That seems like that's a them problem as well, because most people, airmen, capital A or otherwise, people in general, if they see a hole, a loophole, they're gonna take it, right? They're gonna, if you have a contract, you didn't say the right thing, they're gonna find that loophole, they're gonna take it. And so maybe that's a question for a male panel, like how do you become more courageous and, doing your thing to make sure that you hold both genders to the one standard, and that is the Air Force answer. I like what you said about character. I think that's the.
So I kind of want to react to that, but me being in services, it is kind of the opposite of what maybe you guys had to go through, with it being more of a female career field. But I feel like I learned a lot from them. Being able to learn like, okay, this is okay for women, or, maybe this is what they have to go through, or, just even being married or dating someone, seeing it firsthand. So I think that helped me getting that experience from women, and just having to supervise 3 women and one guy. I think that helped a lot for me, which kind of leads into my question, even though I know y'all want to hear the mom question. I think that helped.
Just don't put mom and leader in the same.
Well, so I think one of the biggest things for me that helped me be a better supervisor is getting the parents, getting the moms and the dads that were able to mentor me because they had already went through that experience with their kids. And I really think it affects supervisory skills because it leads out from whatever they have from parenting. Do you think that being a parent overall would help being a supervisor?
Get lots of patience. I think it's important to separate the two. You don't want to come to work every day and act like they're your children, but I think it gives me an extra sense of understanding, I think, of just how to manage things, I guess.
For me, I think it was more of a challenge because I had 2 kids and, another section, and it's hard to separate. You want to kid people, but they're not your kids, right? They have their own faculties. So children are, you're herding cats, so to speak. And airmen are fully capable of functioning adults. And so for me, it was more of a challenge of pulling that back a little bit. Making sure I was able to separate airmen and children. Even now that I'm older, I want to call all airmen kids, and they're not.
Well, from the older folks' perspective, my daughter is the age of young senior airman or staff sergeant, so I would like to think I can stay slightly relevant by keeping up with her. So from that perspective, so the Urban Dictionary, right? Keeping up to speed, gaslighting. I'm like, what? I don't understand. So I think the answer is probably yes, but you just, like she cautioned, is be cautious where and when you use it.
I have one more question before we go into closing remarks. So, one question I guess is, as we continue the inclusivity, welcome. As we continue the inclusivity and we have the council on base, what is some advice or what are your expectations to keep the ball rolling in the right direction so we don't lose momentum? And now I'm really taking notes.
The Air Force isn't gonna let you use it. I mean, we've got extremism day on Friday. culture in the United States has changed, and our culture changes with the presidents, right? So in the Air Force and the DoD reacts from things that are happening. So I think that the Air Force is going to, I don't think it's going away.
How can we help 366 right away? Because we do have the panel, right? How do we run a committee? How do we make sure that we continue this?
I think you need leadership buy-in. Had I not been invited to the meeting today, I wouldn't have known there was a meeting today. So the publicizing the events more, having it pushed maybe through the Rising Six or the top three, or like, yeah, other organizations to promote it and to get involved and sponsor events.
Can I add? So the military has an X number of people, but then you can multiply that when you talk about families. And so I think to try to change the culture without impacting the family is like pushing a rock uphill. We have to get spouses and older children, right? So my son's in high school and he has a lot of issues in school, and so he would love to know like how to be more, how to, you know, have something like this in school, teaching other people how to be sensitive. Like, don't touch my throat. You know how long it takes me to get my throat in the morning? Keep your hands out of it. And so, but to shift the military member and not to shift his family doesn't do any good, right? Because if you have extremism at home, what do you have? You have him acting, you have the member acting one way at work and coming home to extremism. So we really have to make sure that this idea of fighting inclusivity, fighting extremism is a whole effort in all of the Air Force and all of the military, not just in the ones who wear the uniform, but our families as well. So the Spouses Club enlisted officer Spouses Club, making sure that we get their buy-in as well. Youth Center, like everybody. Right. If we can get them at 15 to act right.
We're not raising your kids.
You saw through that.
Uh-huh.
So we will take the notes back as the council. That said, at the bottom of all the flyers, we do have some upcoming events, and I just want to put a plug for them. There is a traveling museum. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It kind of goes a little bit everywhere. I have reached out to the youth center, and I'm getting some artwork because April is the month of the military child, and I want to know what these kids think. I love to ask my kids that, but what does it mean to be a military kid right now? That's what she gets from me. And I want that artwork, and I want, for those that are, you know, grade level to write and stuff. So that's going to be our museum. That's our theme for the month of April. We also are going to partner with the youth center to put on an event in the month of April, specifically for them. And while I was sitting here, I came up with another one, but I have to run that by those guys. And then every second Thursday in this building at 11 o'clock, we have a, we're gonna say, because I feel like that word, diversity and inclusion committee panel. We kind of come together and address some of the issues and some of the events that we would like to go forward and stuff like that. So everyone is welcome to that. That is for the base. We kind of push it out through PA. So maybe we're just missing the mark a little bit, and we want to get it out to the ACE and the 5, 6 and the top 3s and the chief group. So definitely we'll be doing a bigger push on that, so we have a bigger turnout. But that is it's recurring every month. Can't miss it. Second Thursday every month at 11 o'clock in the Zoom room.
Right.
That room. Right. So hopefully that continues and with the momentum. We'll see. But I do want to thank you guys for all being a part of the panel. I say thank you guys. Thank you as leaders for being a part of the panel and taking the time out of your busy schedule and sharing your stories. and really your mentorship and I guess I said experience. So if Chief Gordon would like to close us out.
Did you get my PowerPoint slideshow? So, hey, I think, well put together, well done team. No dead space, right? I felt like it was the view, so I appreciate that. I think we had fun. I had fun, so hope everybody else in the room did too. And hopefully there's some nuggets we can take away. Also appreciate Major Reed's opener there. It's awesome. She did a lot more research than I did. I did a little bit of history research. So I'm like, Women's History Month. Okay. What do you have to say, Google? So apparently Women's History Month's been around for quite some time. Congress passed a law in 1981 and it was Women's History Week. And then in the late 80s, it became Women's History Month. And then probably since about 1995, every president has proclaimed March as Women's History Month, leading us to where we are today. So I mentioned I've been in 28 years. I came in 92. So as I kind of reflect back on a few things, more pieces of history, and I think of the words legacy and I think of the words culture and so much change over time. I look back and in 1992 when I came in, you're probably going to appreciate this story. Now Major General Jeannie Leavitt was our first female fighter pilot. She was graduating with her master's in aeronautics and aerospace, and she was also graduating top of her class in pilot training. So upon graduation, they asked her, hey, what airplane do you want to fly? Her answer in 1992 was the F-15E. And the answer was, no, you can't fly it because women at that time were not allowed to fly. She did not have a choice to fly fighters, bombers, or special mission aircraft. Thankfully, the Secretary of Defense changed that in 1993, and then she became an F-15E driver, and then our first female fighter pilot. And now, I haven't met her personally. I got to Nellis on the tail end of her tenure there as a general. And then I was surprised to see that. I looked her up, and now she's controlling like all of the training out of Joint Base Lackland, like the entire enterprise. So, and oh, by the way, she's married and a mom of two. So I didn't do any research on her kids, but she managed that while doing all the things she did. So certainly opened some doors there. And when you speak to culture that you've experienced, you know, behind closed doors, the GROW, because I'm going to just say GROW, because that's what it is. But the GROW network back there with the air crew, right? I'm joking, but not joking. Women, she noted in 2015, an article I read, she noted that women are becoming less of a novelty in those positions now. I mean, she wrote first, like the first wing commander, female. I think she was probably the first squadron commander. There was a lot of other things, but more and more you're seeing women in these positions. And then same time, so this was 92, she's coming out of pilot training, and then we have now Chief Master of the Air Force Joanne Bass entering the service a year after me in 93. I read her bio, and she and I kind of hit some of the same milestones together. We both went through ALS in 97, and then went through the NCO Academy in 2004. And then she began to get a lot sexier, more Gucci gigs, if you will, positions than me, and began to outpace me. And now here we are, you know, 28-ish years later, and she's now our first female Chief Master of the Air Force. So pretty big deal, pretty big culture shift there, starting with Major General Leavitt. Now here we are, and even with Caleb Wright, culture changes and awesome, you know, barriers are being broken every day. So I also like what the Major said, and I just want you to as you leave here, think about making an impression. So every day we're in our lives, right? Like obviously Chief Bass in her position, and then Major General Leavitt in her position, they're going to affect policy and tons of airmen, tons of culture. Like culture is going to start with them, right? But I would argue that we can also affect culture and we can build our own legacies. And our lives are still yet to unfold, right? So it's blank pages. Like sitting here, you can imagine like Harry Potter, and the pen is just writing, you know, and it's sitting back here with Senior Master Sergeant Parker, and it's writing Chief Foreman attended this thing, and here's all who was in the audience, right? But all this other stuff, it's already happened. So we affect, the future of those pages. And so what I would ask, so in seeing my Sergeant Parker's story, Chief Foreman sitting up here, told some cool stories, whatever he's thinking, right? Probably a good thing. Hopefully I'm not the villain, right, in this story. But the major, she told a different story of how something affected her at a young and impressionable time in her young career. And so I would just say, who are you in someone else's story? And be careful who you are, because you don't want to be the story she told and the experience she had. So I would say take care in how you act and behave, and like we talked about culture, and you have to keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. So you definitely are going to affect the environment around you. You're going to affect your peers, the environment around you, and as you grow and develop, you're going to continue to affect those things. So I'm going to leave you on this little final Chinese proverb, right? So it's be careful your thoughts, because they become your words. Be careful your words, because they become your actions. Be careful your actions, because they become your habits. Be careful your habits, because it becomes your character. And then your character becomes your destiny.
Thank you, ma'am. This concludes our women's panel. Thank you so much for being a part of it. And you're there.
Like, too bad it's not Friday. Can't remember if they're-